A broken home. Emily had once believed that her small hometown in Ohio held an unshakable sense of comfort. The modest, two-story house on Willow Lane, though worn with time, echoed with laughter and the warmth of family dinners. That comfort shattered the morning her mother lost her long battle with illness. Emily, at only 12, stood motionless in the hospital hallway as nurses whispered their condolences. Her father, John, seemed to age years in the span of a single day. His eyes hollow, voice little more than a rasp. The funeral was small but heartfelt. Neighbors left casseroles and cards on their porch, but even the kindest gesture could not fill the void for Emily and her little brother, Tommy. John tried to hold the family together. He struggled to manage work at the hardware store while raising 2 children alone. For a while, Emily admired his resilience and tried to step into her mother's shoes, helping Tommy with his homework and making simple meals. But the house felt colder now, filled with silence and shadows rather than warmth. A year later, Linda entered their lives. She was introduced to Emily and Tommy with an awkward dinner. The roast overcooked, introductions stilted. Linda was attractive, well-dressed, and immediately made her presence felt in the house. Within months, she and John married in a simple courthouse ceremony. Emily, forced into a frilly dress she hated, couldn't shake the sense of something fundamentally wrong. Linda brought with her a young daughter, Jessica, who was a few years younger than Emily. Jessica was quick to claim the best bedroom, demand new toys, and treat Emily's belongings as her own. Her manners changed depending on whether adults were present. When John was around, Jessica would act sweet and polite. But with Emily and Tommy alone, she became critical and condescending, planting the first seeds of rivalry. At first, Emily tried to remain hopeful that a new family could be built from shared pain and new beginnings. But Linda's influence over John became quickly apparent. She commented on Emily's clothes, her grades, and even the way she did chores, always in a backhanded, trying to help manner that made Emily feel small. Soon, small privileges, like choosing TV shows or desserts, were taken from Emily and given to Jessica. Linda decorated the house to Jessica's tastes, boxing up the old keepsakes that reminded Emily of her mother. John, caught between guilt and exhaustion, seemed relieved to let Linda run the household. He was home less and less, often working overtime or visiting friends at the local bar. When he was present, he echoed Linda's criticisms, barely noticing the subtle shifts happening between the children. Tommy, only 7, struggled to adapt, clinging to Emily whenever Linda raised her voice or made another rule. By the end of that first year, Emily's home was unrecognizable. The laughter was gone, replaced by tense, watchful silences. The only moments of comfort came late at night, when Emily listened to Tommy's quiet breaths and tried to recall her mother's lullaby. She began to suspect that the world was not just, or at least, not just to her. Looking out the frosted window, Emily realized she had no choice but to face the future on her own, in a home that no longer felt like hers. The dark days, the months that followed Linda's arrival, were a blur of small humiliations and mounting injustice. The changes crept in quietly at first. Linda began rearranging the house, moving Emily's few cherished possessions into boxes and stacking them in the attic. Family meals, once relaxed and joyful, became strict affairs. No speaking unless spoken to, elbows off the table, always eat what's put in front of you. If Emily hesitated about eating something she didn't like, Linda would fix her with a thin-lipped smile and threaten to take away her evening privileges, which now simply meant her time to read before bed. Tasks around the house multiplied. Linda assigned Emily a rigid daily schedule, waking at 6 to cook breakfast, packing lunches, then sweeping the floors before school. In the afternoons, Emily was expected to wash dishes, fold laundry, and mind Jessica. Linda rarely lifted a finger herself, except to inspect Emily's work and point out its flaws. Jessica, emboldened by her mother's authority, quickly grew into her new role as household favorite. She boasted loudly about her new clothes and toys, many of which were formerly Emily's, and never missed a chance to remind Emily of her unwanted status. Around their father, Jessica was sugary sweet, calling Emily sis and pretending at sisterly affection. The minute John left the room, she'd sneer, tattle, or deliberately break Emily's things. Tommy, who had always been shy, became even more withdrawn. He clung to Emily whenever he could, looking to her for comfort as Linda's voice rang through the house in a steady stream of criticism. Linda dismissed Tommy's preferences, what he liked to eat, the bedtime stories he wanted, as unimportant. "You're too soft on him, Emily," she'd say. "He needs to toughen up." As the months wore on, John seemed to vanish into himself. He worked longer hours and when he was home, sat in front of the television with his dinner, barely speaking to anyone. If Emily tried to talk to him about school or how Tommy was struggling, he'd just sigh and tell her not to cause trouble for your stepmother. Emily's once strong bond with her father faded little by little, replaced by a kind of dull ache. School, too, became a refuge Emily could no longer count on. Linda set early curfews and banned friends from visiting. She scrutinized Emily's grades, never satisfied even when she excelled. "You think that's good enough?" Linda would remark, holding a B+ test paper between two fingers as if it were a piece of trash. Sometimes Linda forgot to hand in permission slips or sign homework folders, and Emily suffered the consequences at school. It wasn't just the constant chores or the loss of her father's affection that wore Emily down. It was the suffocating sense of unfairness. Every complaint was dismissed as childish whining. Every small act of kindness Emily tried to show Tommy was criticized as coddling. Every failure, no matter how small, was amplified and used as evidence of her unworthiness. At night, lying awake in the tiny attic bedroom she now shared with Tommy, Emily sometimes wished she could run away and take her brother with her. But she was only 13, and the world felt impossibly big and hostile. So she held Tommy close and whispered comforting words, promising that someday things would be different, even if she didn't know how or when. The dark days dragged on, marked by a tightening of rules, a deepening sadness, and the slow erosion of hope. Yet hidden deep within Emily's heart, a quiet determination began to take root, a fragile but growing conviction that she wouldn't let this injustice be the end of her story. Failed attempts. As seasons changed, Emily clung to hope by pouring herself into her studies. School became her only escape, a place where she could lose herself in books and the reassuring sameness of routine. Despite the long days of chores and the constant tension at home, Emily maintained good grades. She dreamed of one day earning a scholarship, leaving Willow Lane behind, and taking Tommy with her to a place where neither of them would ever sleep afraid. But Linda seemed to lurk in every corner, intent on sabotaging any glimmer of progress. She insisted that Emily finish household chores before homework, often assigning extra tasks if Emily had a test or project due. More than once, Emily missed deadlines or arrived at school exhausted, her work hurried or incomplete. Whenever teachers grew concerned, Linda would smooth things over with pleasant-sounding excuses. "She's just distracted by her mother's passing," or "We're working on building responsibility at home." Emily's struggles were hidden by a mask of adult reasonableness that only increased her isolation. Still, she pressed on. When an opportunity arose to apply for an after-school science program, Emily stayed up late crafting the perfect essay, determined not to let her circumstances define her. She didn't breathe a word of it at home, quietly forging her father's signature for the permission slip because she knew John, if he noticed, would simply defer to Linda. Yet Emily's efforts were thwarted from the start. The acceptance letter mysteriously disappeared from the mail pile before she ever saw it. Later, her teacher delicately informed her that another student had been selected when her parents declined the invitation on her behalf. The betrayal stung all the more because she could only grieve in silence. Things came to a head when Linda caught Emily reading by flashlight after chores were finished. The next morning, Linda accused her of sneaking around and implied she'd stolen money from her purse to buy the batteries. Emily denied it, but her voice was too soft, her father too tired to care. Linda relished the punishment: extra chores, no books for a week, and an icy warning that liars never prosper. Jesha, meanwhile, found endless ways to needle Emily. She boasted loudly about her new clothes, ridiculed Emily's old hand-me-downs, and always seemed to be the first to tattle on every minor misstep. Yet, in front of John or visitors, she was sweetness itself, painting herself as the perfect stepdaughter. The unfairness was suffocating, but Emily swallowed her anger, confiding only in Tommy during their whispered nighttime conversations. Tommy, sensitive to every slight, became quieter with every day. He picked up on the way Linda pushed him aside, never bothering to ask about his day, always favoring Jessica's wants and stories. Emily worked hard to protect him from Linda's sharp tongue, always absorbing the blame or promising him that things wouldn't always be like this. Sometimes small gestures of kindness at school, an extra cookie from a sympathetic lunch lady, a wink from her homeroom teacher, kept Emily afloat. But she was careful never to reveal too much. She feared that if she let her guard down, Linda would find a new way to punish her, or worse, take it out on Tommy. By spring, Emily felt her options slipping away. She applied for scholarships in secret, hid money from her part-time babysitting jobs, and made plans she was too young and too scared to carry out. Every time she thought she was one step closer to freedom, Linda blocked the way, intercepting phone calls, losing important mail, even whispering veiled threats about what would happen to Tommy if Emily ever left. Each failed attempt left her feeling weaker, smaller, her dreams dulling at the edges. Yet even as hope became more fragile, Emily's determination did not break. She would not give Linda, or anyone else, the satisfaction of seeing her give up. Through every disappointment, every silent tear at night, Emily clung fiercely to her love for her brother, willing herself to keep going for his sake, even if her own future seemed impossibly far away. The decision to leave. Emily could trace the final unraveling of her childhood to a single stormy evening. For weeks, the tension in the house had grown almost unbearable, a tightness in the air that pressed on her chest with every breath. Linda had grown bolder, her rules more arbitrary. Curfews moved earlier, allowances vanished, every minor misstep magnified into an inexcusable offense. John, her father, had become little more than a shadow, moving through their home with the weary detachment of a ghost. Tommy, once timid but spirited, had become almost silent, his eyes wide and careful, always searching for the next sign of trouble. That night, thunder rattled the window panes, and rain streaked down the glass in dark rivers. Emily had worked late cleaning the kitchen after dinner, scrubbing at pots and dishes while Linda supervised, arms crossed and eyes sharp. Jessica lounged on the sofa, shoes still on, watching television. Tommy, afraid of storms, hovered nearby, clutching a battered plush rabbit that had once belonged to Emily. She reached out to comfort him when Linda's voice pierced the room. "Emily, where's my necklace?" Linda's tone was accusing, giving no suggestion that this was a question and not a verdict. Emily froze, still holding a wet dish. "I haven't seen it," she answered, her heart suddenly pounding. "You were dusting in my bedroom today, weren't you?" Linda's gaze narrowed, and the room went quiet except for the TV's cheerful laughter. Emily nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. Yes, but I never touched your things. Linda made a show of searching, rifling through drawers and jewelry boxes in her bedroom, calling Jessica to help. Tommy slipped his hand into Emily's, trembling. Within minutes, Linda stormed back, clutching an empty velvet box. She waved it in front of Emily's face. This was on my dresser. Now it's gone. Only you had the opportunity. Jessica chimed in. Yeah, I saw her going through your things, Mom. She was in there a long time. It was a lie. Emily had been there no longer than necessary, dusting gingerly as she'd been taught, careful never to touch anything personal. But Linda latched onto Jessica's words with relish. That's it, Linda declared, her words icy and absolute. You've been nothing but trouble from the start. Hand it over now, and we'll forget this. Emily stared at her, bewildered and angry. I didn't take anything. I promise. John entered, drawn by the commotion, his tired eyes flicking between Linda and his daughter. What's going on here? Linda spun her story quickly, her voice thick with manufactured hurt. Your daughter has stolen from me. My gold necklace, the one you gave me for our anniversary. She was the only one in the room. She nodded toward Jessica for confirmation. Tommy's grip on Emily's hand tightened. John's shoulders slumped. He didn't even ask Emily for her side. Instead, he looked at her with resignation. Emily, if you took it, just admit it. We don't need any more trouble tonight. Emily's face flushed with humiliation and despair. I didn't. She choked back tears, but seeing her father's doubt shattered something inside her. Linda shook her head. This isn't a safe home for the rest of us if we can't trust everyone living here. Her voice softened, becoming sickly sweet. Maybe it's time for Emily to consider living elsewhere. Emily could no longer bear it. Years of swallowing anger, of enduring lies and scorn and isolation had worn her down to raw nerves. For the first time, she felt a cold clarity settle over her. She didn't belong here. Not anymore. There was nothing left of the home she once knew. Only walls holding memories she was being forced to bury. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Emily sat with Tommy under the bare bulb in their cramped attic room. Rain drummed steady on the roof, and the shadows seemed deeper than ever. Tommy's cheeks were wet with silent tears. I don't want you to go, he whispered. Emily brushed his hair from his forehead, blinking back her own tears. I know, sweetie, but I can't stay. It's not safe, and it's only going to get worse. He pressed his battered rabbit to his chest, voice shaking. Are you gonna forget about me? Never, she whispered fiercely. You're my little brother. No matter what, I'll find a way to come back for you. I just need to get strong enough. They sat like that for a long time, saying nothing more. Emily's thoughts raced. What to take? Where to go? Whether she'd even succeed. She'd saved a little money from babysitting and odd jobs, carefully hidden inside an old shoe. She had some clothes, her school bag, a tattered paperback novel from her mother. By dawn, her decision was solid. She packed quietly, not wanting to wake Tommy or arouse suspicion. She left the battered rabbit tucked in with her brother and scrawled a note, promising she would write as soon as she could. Her hands shook as she laid the note by his pillow. Downstairs, the air was thick with morning silence. Linda heard Emily on the stairs and appeared in the kitchen doorway, eyes cold. Leaving so soon? Don't come back until you're ready to be honest. There was no warmth, no sadness, only the smug satisfaction of a victory won. John sat in his recliner, half asleep, unmoved, as Emily slipped on her shoes and pulled her threadbare jacket around her. He didn't look up. Jessica watched from the top of the stairs, a slight, victorious smile on her face. Outside, the sky was still gray. Emily walked quickly, not daring to look back. She made her way to the small bus station on the edge of town, clutching her savings and her bag. The fear almost choked her, but she forced herself forward, propelled by something deeper than anger or heartbreak. An iron resolve that she was not destined to disappear, that she would not be crushed by the meanness of others. At the station, she bought a one-way ticket to Columbus, the nearest real city, where she hoped to find work and perhaps one day, a new beginning. As the bus rumbled down the highway, Emily watched her hometown shrink in the rearview mirror, the streets and houses growing smaller, indistinct. She grieved, but beneath the sorrow was something harder and brighter. Hope mixed with determination. Emily had left behind nearly everything. Her childhood, the few fading pictures of her mother, the brother she loved more than anyone. But as the city's lights grew brighter on the horizon, she promised herself that one day she would return. Not as a powerless girl, but as someone strong enough to reclaim what was hers and to protect those who could not protect themselves. It was the end of one chapter, but not the end of her story. Even as loneliness pressed in, Emily straightened her shoulders and looked forward, toward freedom, and perhaps someday, justice. The journey of resilience. The city welcomed Emily with a rush of unfamiliar sounds, blaring sirens, shouting vendors, and feet shuffling across rain-slick sidewalks. The jumbled lights of Columbus flickered with promise, but also with exhaustion. With nothing more than a battered duffel bag and a sealed envelope of savings, Emily stepped off the bus and into a new life, her entire being tingling with disbelief, fear, and desperate hope. Her first days blurred together in a haze of searching. She wandered from block to block, feeling entirely anonymous among the crowds and skyscrapers. The city was bursting with people, and yet never had she felt more alone. She stretched every dollar, sleeping in a run-down youth shelter when she could find a spot. Other nights, wrapping her coat around herself on bus benches, clutching her bag tightly. Sometimes hunger gnawed at her resolve. But every time she reached into her pocket out of longing for her old home, for the warmth of her mother's voice, the feel of Tommy's hand, she stopped herself, remembering what she'd left behind and why she could never go back. With steely focus, she set out to find any kind of work. Her first few attempts were disasters. Store managers barely glanced up before shaking their heads, or sent her away with forms she couldn't fill out without a permanent address. When she finally stumbled into a tiny family-owned diner on the city's east side, Emily felt the familiar ache in her stomach spike at the smell of frying eggs and fresh coffee. She asked for the owner, voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Alvarez, the diner owner, was a stout man with kind eyes and a gruff voice. "You looking for a meal or for work?" he asked. Emily told the truth, admitting she could use both. For a long minute, he studied her, then nodded toward the kitchen. "You wash? You sweep?" Emily nodded eagerly, and so began her first real job. It was grueling at first. She worked double shifts whenever she was allowed, cleaning, running food, and occasionally sneaking a bite of leftover pie when no one looked. The staff, many of whom had their own troubled pasts, quickly recognized Emily as a hard worker. Mrs. Nguyen, a cook who reminded Emily of the teachers she once adored, became her quiet friend, teaching her tricks to hide fatigue and offering sly smiles of encouragement. When she made her first tips, Emily pressed the crumpled bills into her notebook, marking them as hope for the future. Despite exhaustion, Emily registered herself at the local library, determined not to let her education fade. She juggled her shifts with GED prep classes, spending long nights bent over textbooks and shaking off memories of Willow Lane. Sometimes her thoughts spiraled back to Tommy. She worried about what he ate, if he remembered the lullabies their mother once hummed. Every time she thought of home, the heavy ache in her chest forced her to push harder, to prove that she could survive and carve a path not just for herself, but for her brother too. After 4 months, Emily found a run-down room to rent above an old laundromat. The landlord, Mrs. Goldberg, seemed severe at first, but recognized something familiar in Emily. "Keep it clean," she said, passing over the key. "And keep at that schoolwork." Emily made the shoebox-sized space her haven, pinning a picture of her mother, saved from her old notebook, above the rickety bed. As she built her new life, Emily made cautious friends. She met Jasmine, a college freshman waitressing after her classes, who roped Emily into midnight walks and swapped thrift store fashion tips. Javier, a medical student who also worked at the diner, tutored her in math between customers. Bit by bit, Emily's world widened. She realized that scars like hers were everywhere beneath the surface smiles of strangers. Together, their little circle offered each other scraps of support. Shared meals, borrowed jackets, reassurances whispered on nights when the city's loneliness threatened to swallow them up. Yet Emily's strongest bond still pulsed hundreds of miles away. Every payday, she sent money orders, small and carefully disguised, in envelopes addressed to a neighbor in her old town, hoping they might reach Tommy. She scoured cheap prepaid phones for ways to set up anonymous social media accounts, knowing Linda sometimes read her brother's messages. Late at night, she would send coded texts or short emails, always worrying that Linda would intercept them but trusting Tommy would understand. "Stay brave," she would write. "Remember the rabbit. One day soon." Her greatest breakthrough came the winter she won a local essay contest, her story of perseverance catching the eye of a high school counselor. Encouraged, Emily gathered her transcripts, recommendation letters from Mr. Alvarez and Mrs. Nguyen, and began applying for scholarships with the desperation of someone who knew what was at stake. Rejection letters came first, and she braced herself, but then an acceptance. A full ride to a small state college, room, board, and all tuition covered. The day she received her acceptance letter, Emily collapsed on her narrow bed, clutching it to her chest, the tears silent but overwhelming. She thought of her mother's quiet wisdom, of Tommy's frightened eyes, of every cold night and missed meal along the journey. Now, for the first time, the future shimmered with possibility, not dread. College life was a whirlwind. Emily juggled classes, a part-time job on campus, and volunteer work at the local library. She dove into her studies, choosing social work as her field, fueled by memories of injustice and longing to help others claw their way out of similar darkness. Professors appreciated her passion, classmates admired her drive, but only a precious few knew the cost of her ambition. The one constant in her life was her connection to Tommy. She monitored his school records when she could, communicated in secret, and sent what support she could manage. During the hardest moments, when she missed home or doubted her worth, it was Tommy's messages that made her persevere. "Can't wait till you come get me," or "Mom would be proud of you." As months turned into years, Emily transformed. She learned to trust, to hope, and to harness her pain as a force for change. She found strength not in bitterness, but in kindness, volunteering in shelters and sharing her story with girls who reminded her of herself. Tired, traumatized, but still burning with a stubborn flicker of hope. Through every challenge, Emily's love for her brother was the thread that kept her from unraveling. Her determination was forged in suffering, but matured in the light of new friendships and dreams. In each success, she saw not just her own triumph, but a step closer to the day she could return for Tommy. She carried her childhood scars, but she wore them as emblems, not of weakness, but of the iron will it took to leave survive, and rise above what tried to break her. And as she prepared for the next chapter, her final years in college, and the looming battle to reclaim her brother, Emily knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her journey of resilience was not only for herself, but for every child still waiting for a home that felt safe. The return. Years had slipped by since Emily's desperate flight from her childhood home. She had become unrecognizable, transformed from a frightened girl into a confident young woman, her posture straighter, her gaze steadier than she had ever believed possible. Now, with her college diploma in hand and a promising job at a city social services agency, she finally felt equipped to confront the scars of her past and keep a burning promise she had carried with her through every lonely night. She would return for Tommy. Even as she built her new life in the humming city, with its tall glass towers, endless traffic, and vibrant tapestry of people, Emily's thoughts often drifted back to the weathered house on Willow Lane. She clung to news in scraps, coded updates from Tommy, messages slipped between the lines by her old neighbor Mrs. Wilson, and occasional glimpses on social media. Each word painted a darker picture. Where once their family home had been a haven, now it was crumbling beneath neglect and the weight of Linda's iron fist. John's fortunes, once modest but steady, had declined rapidly. The hardware store faltered amid poor management and mounting debt. Rumors of gambling losses filtered back to Emily through small-town gossip. Soon, Linda was seizing control. She closed bank accounts, sold off precious family heirlooms, and tightened her grip on Tommy, who now stood on the threshold of adulthood, yet remained trapped, denied the freedom Emily had managed to claw for herself. Tommy's accounts were heartbreaking, but always brief. "Linda barely feeds us anymore," he wrote once. "Dad just sleeps all day or yells when she lets him. I miss school. She wants me to quit and help her at some job." Sometimes the messages stopped for weeks, and Emily's worry would gnaw at her until he surfaced again with a small, desperate reassurance. "I'm okay. Still waiting for you." The injustice of it all kept Emily up at night. Her work as a social worker, helping children find refuge from abuse and neglect, was shaped by her own experience and by the hope, unyielding, sometimes agonizing, that she could one day save her brother in turn. At last, the call for help came unmistakably clear. Tommy sent a voice message, his tone deeper now, but trembling. "Emily, I can't take it much longer. Linda never lets me out. She's trying to put the house in her name. Dad's worse than ever. You promised, Em. Please, I need you." For a moment, Emily found herself frozen, the years twisting backward, the rain on the attic window, Tommy's tear-stained face, the silent plea in his eyes. Only this time, she was not powerless. She knew the law, understood the quiet mechanisms of abuse, and had forged connections that would lend weight to her fight. She set her plan into careful motion. First, Emily requested extended leave from work, explaining only that it was a personal emergency. Her supervisors knowing compassion, giving her strength. She gathered all the evidence she had quietly collected over the years. Tommy's messages, copies of their correspondence with teachers, and statements from Mrs. Wilson, who had witnessed the slow disintegration of the family next door. Emily called in favors from classmates studying law, who steered her through the thickets of custody and property rights. She reached out to Tommy's former guidance counselor, now the school principal, who recalled a bright boy suddenly vanishing from class and agreed to testify. Returning to Willow Lane after so long felt surreal, as if she were drifting through an old dream. The town itself had changed little. The same sleepy Ohio streets, the diner still advertising its world's best pie. But the air felt heavier as she finally walked up her old block. The family house was nearly hidden now behind an overgrown hedge and chipping white paint. In the window, a flicker of movement, just long enough for her to glimpse Tommy's familiar, anxious silhouette. The next days were a whirlwind of action and emotion. Emily met with a local attorney she couldn't have afforded years ago. When she explained her brother's situation, the woman's expression hardened with resolve. Together, they contacted the authorities, including Child Protective Services. With firm documentation and persistent advocacy, Emily pushed for a formal investigation into Linda's conduct and John's neglect. For the first time, the adults who had failed to see or act all those years ago now listened, really listened. Emily maintained as much contact with Tommy as Linda would allow, instructing him to stay safe and speak honestly to the caseworker who soon visited the house. When the authorities arrived, Linda was caught off guard, her composure slipping as she tried to explain away the dilapidated state of the house, Tommy's absence from school, and the sudden disappearance of family possessions. Tommy, emboldened for the first time by the presence of someone fighting for him, finally spoke the truth. He described the verbal abuse, the missed meals and isolation, the fear that chased him through every day. Meanwhile, John, once so solid, now a shell of himself, sat numbly as the proceedings unfolded around him. It was only when the threat of losing everything became real that something shifted in his eyes, and at long last, regret cut through his stupor. He apologized, haltingly, clumsily, to Emily, though she could not bring herself to embrace him. Too much had been damaged, but she recognized the hint of the father she once loved. The custody hearing was tense, the courtroom thick with unresolved pain. Linda sputtered accusations, insisting she was the true victim. But Emily's prepared evidence, Tommy's testimony, and the statements from social workers and school officials finally broke the cycle of denial. Linda's mask slipped beneath the weight of the truth, her schemes exposed, her treatment of Tommy and Emily revealed to the public at last. When the gavel came down, granting Emily custody of Tommy and freezing Linda's remaining access to the family estate, Emily exhaled the breath she'd been holding for years. Tommy, taller now but still so clearly her little brother, rushed to embrace her. The reunion was fierce and tearful, years of separation and longing pouring out in a single, trembling moment. They left the courthouse hand in hand. For Tommy, the nightmare was finally over, but both siblings knew the road ahead would be hard. They returned to the city together, where Emily cleared space in her cramped apartment, bought Tommy his favorite food, and signed him up to return to school. The journey of healing was only just beginning, but this time, they faced it side by side. Emily often gazed out their apartment window, city lights twinkling in the distance, her chest swelling with both relief and possibility. She had reclaimed her brother, her voice, and her sense of justice. Most importantly, she had turned the promise made years ago into an unbreakable reality. For Tommy, for herself, and for every child still lost in the darkness, she would always come back. Unmasking the truth. The days following the courtroom's decision brought a cascade of changes that rippled through Emily's old town, unsettling deep roots of secrecy and shame. Until now, Linda had cultivated a public image of respectability, a polished, charitable wife who kept her household running despite tragic loss. With whispers circulating about the custody battle and Child Protective Services investigation, cracks in her facade began to show. The truth was no longer hiding in dusty corners. It was demanding to be seen in the bright light of day. Emily, newly granted custody of Tommy, knew their fight was not over. Victory in court was momentous, but the community needed to understand the truth about what had happened on Willow Lane. Too many times before, teachers, neighbors, even her father had looked away or accepted simple explanations. Now, propelled by her own experience and a fierce need to prevent others from falling into the same traps, Emily felt a duty to break the silence that Linda's manipulations had enforced. She began by gathering documentation, painstakingly collected evidence of Linda's mistreatment, financial exploitation, and verbal abuse. She recorded Tommy's account of missed meals, isolation, and threats. Mrs. Wilson, their neighbor, agreed to provide a statement, finally revealing the odd sights and sounds she had nervously ignored. Tommy's thinness, the shouting late at night, the sudden, sharp turn in the atmosphere after Linda's arrival. Emily sought help from reporters at the local newspaper. The editor, skeptical at first, reconsidered after reviewing court records and interviews with school officials. Emily wrote an open letter, raw and courageous, outlining what she and Tommy endured, not just the specifics of Linda's cruelty, but the subtler injuries, the community's complicity, the teachers who never pressed after absences, the pastors who never visited. She called for vigilance and for empathy, reminding everyone that abuse could thrive in any home, masked by outward appearances and polite conversation. Linda, realizing her power was slipping, tried desperately to regain control. She filed nuisance complaints. She attempted to discredit Emily's character, painting herself as the real victim, a woman burdened with a difficult stepdaughter and a troubled stepson. But her voice had lost the ring of authority. Her pleas sounded shrill and evasive to townspeople now seeing a fuller picture. Some parents admitted doubts they'd long suppressed, recalling the way Jessica was favored, the frightened look in Tommy's eyes, or Linda's reluctance to discuss home life. The investigation continued to dig deeper. Bank records showed a disturbing trail of missing funds, cashed checks from John's once modest savings, items pawned that had belonged to Emily and Tommy's late mother. Social services confirmed years of neglect and emotional harm, while neighbors and school counselors stepped forward with corroborating memories. For Jessica, the unraveling was devastation mixed with confusion. She'd grown accustomed to the privileges of being Linda's daughter. The new clothes, the attention, the easy affection doled out when she played her part in public. Now, at school, whispers followed her. Former friends, unsure how to react, drifted away. At home, Linda was erratic, one moment smothering Jessica with anxious affection, the next raging at her, blaming her for not being careful enough or for siding with the enemy. The stability Jessica once mocked Emily for craving had vanished. Tommy, meanwhile, was adjusting, hesitant, but brighter in Emily's company. When pressed by the investigators, he spoke with a soft honesty that left no room for doubt. Linda always yelled at me and Emily. She called us lazy, made us miss meals. Sometimes she locked us out of our rooms or took our things if we upset her. He had to pause, tears brimming in his eyes, but there was strength in his voice as he added, Emily kept me safe. She promised she'd come back. I never stopped hoping. The court's judgment became public record, reported in articles headlined not with scandal, but with the sobering truth of what had been allowed to persist. Linda's reputation was shattered, her allies dwindling. Gone were the invitations to town society events and PTA meetings. Even her oldest friends kept their distance, ashamed by what they'd failed to notice or, worse, helped conceal. The sheriff delivered a formal statement confirming that, in addition to losing custody of Tommy, Linda faced charges for fraud and endangering a minor. Through the ordeal, John finally emerged, humbled and broken, yet also shaken awake. The consequences of his denial were plain. He'd lost not just his son and daughter, but the respect of his community, the remnants of his business, and perhaps, most painfully, the memory of the family he'd had before Linda's shadow took hold. In a letter to Emily, he wrote, "I cannot undo the past. I can only ask for your forgiveness and try to make sure I never again turn away from the truth." Emily's journey was not about revenge, but about healing, for Tommy, for herself, and if possible, for those who might have become bystanders in another tragedy. She spoke at local forums, urging teachers, parents, and teens to recognize the nuanced signs of emotional and psychological abuse. Her presence, calm, wounded, yet resilient, challenged others to reflect on their roles in both her pain and her recovery. Local advocacy groups reached out to her to share her story and even offer her a part-time role advising other teens in crisis. Jessica, for her part, reached out to Emily months later. The message was tentative. "I'm sorry for how Mom treated you. I know I hurt you too. I want to understand. It wasn't all your fault. Maybe someday we could talk?" Emily, remembering the loneliness and envy that had governed so much of their past, hesitated but agreed to meet. Their first meeting was awkward, but honest. Both carried scars, Jessica of entitlement and complicity, Emily of exclusion and survival. Forgiveness would be a long road, but awareness was the first step. In the final tally, Emily knew the price of the truth. It was paid with sleepless nights, lost innocence, and relationships changed beyond repair. But she also saw what honesty, persistence, and courage could build. A safer home for Tommy, a lesson carved into the memory of a once indifferent town, and hope for children still caught in silence. She continued to advocate, joining local boards and mentoring those who, like the child she once was, needed to know someone cared enough to stand by them, to believe them, to fight for the truth. Reunion and renewal. In the wake of the courtroom storm and the crumbling of Linda's false empire, a new kind of quiet settled over Emily and Tommy's lives. A fragile peace, colored by uncertainty, but brightened by sudden possibility. The world felt different now, vast and a little strange, as if the air itself had changed with the knowledge that freedom, so long denied, was finally theirs. Emily awoke that first morning in her small city apartment with a sense of disbelief, almost afraid that the certainty of Tommy's presence just down the hall was a trick of her imagination. For so many years, their bond had lived in secret letters, coded text messages, and whispered promises in the dark. Now, she could simply open the door and see her brother sprawled under a pile of mismatched blankets, breathing deeply in safe, undisturbed sleep. For Tommy, safety was an unfamiliar sensation. The first nights after their reunion were restless. He startled at every creak in the floorboards or slam of a distant cabinet. Sometimes he still mumbled apologies in his sleep for things that were never his fault. But Emily was always there in the morning, greeting him with pancakes if she could scrape together the ingredients, or just a gentle hand on his shoulder and the soft assurance, "You're home. You're safe." The early weeks together were marked by tentative steps, both literal and emotional. Tommy returned to school, older than his classmates, but determined to catch up. The world of homework and cafeterias was a bewildering freedom. He made friends slowly. At first, only exchanging shy smiles or quiet nods, but eventually joining a group in the science club. Emily watched him with pride and aching recognition, remembering the cautious hope she once carried into every new space. Emily herself had her own process of reawakening. She returned to work at the social service agency with a new sense of purpose and fire. Her experiences had always driven her to help marginalized children, but now, with Tommy beside her, her advocacy took on a sharper focus. She spoke at local schools, sharing her story not out of bitterness, but as proof that survival was possible. The room always went silent when she told of nights in the attic, the silent promise to her brother, and the long journey back to each other. Afterwards, students, and sometimes teachers, would stay behind to whisper their own secrets or ask, "How did you keep going?" Emily would meet their eyes and simply say, "Because I knew my story wasn't over, and neither is yours." At home, healing was not instant. They had to learn each other all over again, not as ghostly embers of sibling love, but as real people with new scars and growing edges. Sometimes Tommy retreated into himself, lost in memory or gripped by shame for things he rationally knew weren't his fault. Sometimes Emily's patience frayed. She feared she'd never be enough, never erase the years lost in Linda's grasp. But every setback ended the same way, with clumsy hugs in the kitchen or late-night talks at the edge of Tommy's bed. Together, they built new traditions, like making pizza every Friday on their tiny stovetop, or volunteering on weekends at the animal shelter. Each small ritual was a way to lay bricks in the new foundation of their life. On weekends, they would wander the city together. Emily pointed out corners of her survival: the bench where she used to sleep under bus stop lights, the window of the diner that had given her her first chance. Tommy listened with awe and growing understanding, slowly realizing the depth of Emily's sacrifices. These walks became their quiet form of therapy, a way to map the new landscape of their freedom, one block at a time. John, their father, tried awkwardly to re-enter their lives. He sent soft-spoken letters of contrition and even made the trip to the city once, standing stiffly in the doorway of Emily's apartment, hat in hand. Emily could see the burden of regret resting on his shoulders. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight," he told her and Tommy, "but I want to do right. If you'll let me, I'll keep trying." The siblings agreed to start slowly, short phone calls, occasional lunches. It was not the healing of a wound, but the careful binding of a scar. Linda, now stripped of her power, faded into obscurity. News reports confirmed the court's judgment. Charges of fraud and child endangerment barred her from seeing Tommy or possessing anything from the family estate. Jessica, once a rival, reached out with hesitant messages. Though their relationship would never be the same, Emily's offer of forgiveness remained genuine, a testament to her conviction that cycles could be broken, even for those who had walked a darker path. With time and gentle persistence, joy began to return to their lives in small, almost startling ways. Laughter during board games, bright mornings without fear, and new friends invited for dinner and stories. Tommy's confidence grew, his nightmares receded, and his grades soared. Emily, once haunted by loneliness, found herself surrounded by a new kind of family: colleagues, fellow survivors, neighbors, and, most importantly, her brother. As the months slipped into years, Emily became a pillar in her community. She helped found a youth mentorship program for children in crisis and was sought after for both her expertise and her empathy. Her own story inspired local campaigns for school counselors and new shelters. Tommy, now taller than Emily, took on the role of peer mentor at his high school, sharing his insight with younger kids struggling through their own invisible wars. Every year, on the anniversary of their reunion, Emily and Tommy would take a special trip to Willow Lane. At first, they stood in silence by the old house, overgrown now, windows dust-spattered, a fading landmark of suffering overcome. Instead of bitterness, they laid a bouquet of wildflowers in the yard, honoring the memory of their mother and the resilience that brought them through the darkness together. Emily's message, unspoken yet tangible, was that hope is not the absence of pain, but the steady insistence that new life can grow from even the most barren ground. in loving Tommy, in learning to forgive their father, in daring to forgive even Jessica. Emily kept the promise she had made all those years ago, to return not just for rescue, but for renewal. And when people asked her how she survived, how she rebuilt from ruins, Emily only smiled and replied, "I walked a long road with the people I love. That's how you start again." Optional: Jessica and Linda, the price paid. While Emily and Tommy began healing and rebuilding their lives elsewhere, two others from the Willow Lane household were facing consequences of a very different nature. For Linda and Jessica, the aftermath of the truth's exposure was less a clean slate and more a reckoning, a slow burn of regret, loneliness, and reevaluation of everything they once took for granted. For Linda, justice arrived not as swift retribution, but as a gradual unraveling. After the court's ruling, Linda was indicted on charges of fraud, financial exploitation, and child endangerment. She stood no chance of regaining custody of Tommy and was barred from approaching either child. The legal process stripped away her last shreds of respectability. Articles appeared in the local paper, colleagues at her part-time job turned cold, and former friends crossed the street to avoid her. But the hardest blow was losing control. Her carefully curated image, always the elegant community wife and steadfast volunteer, crumbled under the glare of public accountability. No amount of self-pity or excuses could mask the bank records, school reports, and witness testimonies now laid bare. Linda petitioned for leniency, citing personal struggles and public shame, but the judge was unswayed, pointing out the deliberate and ongoing nature of her harm. Civic organizations quietly and quickly cut ties, her name scrubbed from membership rolls and charity event lists. Left in the echo of her own misdeeds, Linda withdrew into obscurity. Her once lively home was sold at auction to pay legal debts. She was left with no audience for her grievances, only the silence of regret for opportunities wasted, affection withheld, and a family torn apart by her choices. In her mandated counseling sessions, Linda initially raged and blamed. Over time, however, stripped of her platforms and denied the distraction of daily schemes, she was forced to confront her own emptiness. Sometimes, in the dull glow of her modest apartment, Linda replayed moments from the past. Emily's cautious hospitality as a child, Tommy's wide-eyed trust, the laughter that once filled the house. For the first time, remorse flickered, not out of self-pity, but out of a painful clarity about the harm she had caused. It wasn't redemption, but it was the beginning of an honest reckoning. Jessica, meanwhile, carried a different burden. At school and online, whispers dogged her steps. Once so quick to assert herself, grabbing the biggest slice of cake, the brightest dress, the best bedroom, she was now alone in crowded halls. Many of her friends' parents forbade them from visiting or stopped inviting her to birthday parties, their affection replaced by wary politeness or outright avoidance. In the privacy of her own room, Jessica's bravado vanished. She scrolled through old photos, seeing herself with Emily and Tommy. Not quite sisters, but connected by shared meals and family rituals. The mocking words she'd once thrown at Emily echoed now with uncomfortable weight. She thought of the way she'd sought Linda's approval, parroting her mother's criticisms, eager to belong. It all seemed hollow now. Worse, Jessica sometimes overheard her mother on the phone, unleashing complaints and accusations, never admitting any real responsibility for the pain she'd caused. Her inner conflict swelled as Emily's letter in the newspaper, honest, vulnerable, and gracious, made rounds at the school. For weeks, Jessica avoided eye contact with everyone. She considered running away, as Emily once had, but discovered there was nowhere she truly wished to go. The first step toward healing came through a shaky act of courage. Jessica reached out to Emily. She typed out message after message, deleting most before sending. Finally, she sent a brief, raw note. "I'm sorry for what Mom did and for how I acted. I wish I had been different. I don't know where to start, but I want to understand." Emily's response wasn't instantaneous, and when it came, it was layered with honesty. Forgiveness, Emily wrote, was not blind. It was a willingness to listen, learn, and face hard truths. She offered Jessica the chance to meet. Their first public get-together felt awkward. Jessica fidgeted with her sleeves and barely met Emily's eyes, struggling to express the shame and confusion gnawing at her. But Emily's openness and lack of bitterness steadied the conversation. She asked her former stepsister about school, about what Jessica wanted for the future. Small, gentle questions that carried their own kind of trust. Jessica left that meeting unsure whether she'd ever earn true forgiveness. But she returned home feeling lighter, as if a door long locked was now cracked open. With gradual plodding effort, Jessica sought out a school counselor and joined a support group for teens dealing with family strife. She apologized in person to Tommy too, who at first only nodded, silent as he processed all he'd endured. Jessica pledged to never again stand by if she witnessed another child suffering, determined to become someone worthy of trust. As months passed, Jessica rebuilt herself in the quiet spaces, volunteering at the local library, raising funds for at-risk youth, developing friendships with classmates who valued honesty over popularity. She bore the sting of her past, but tried to turn each memory into a lesson. Her relationship with Linda, once her entire world, became distant, a reminder of how far she'd come and how hard she'd worked to choose a different path. For Linda and Jessica, the price of the truth was not only public censure or legal punishment, but also the loss of certainty. The realization that their actions and inaction alike had shaped lives, for better or worse. Linda's journey toward redemption remained uncertain. Jessica's path, winding and unfinished, was driven not by duty, but by the hope of becoming someone worthy of the trust once broken. Meanwhile, Emily and Tommy carried on with their new lives, strengthened by both forgiveness and boundaries. Emily never forgot the pain caused by Linda and Jessica, but she let compassion, not bitterness, lead her choices. She left the door open for reconciliation, slow, guarded, but still possible. The chapter closed not with dramatic reunions or easy answers, but with a quiet sense that growth was possible even in the aftermath of ruin. The pain Linda and Jessica caused would never fully vanish, but the legacy of their actions, met by contrition and honest change, offered an example of how even broken stories could be threads in a tapestry of hope.